had a hay chopper that would pick up the hay, chop it up, and blow it on a wagon. And I was running up and down the field with this thing with no wagon on behind it. I was picking up the hay, chopping it up, just blowing it out on the field. And there was a procession of neighbors went by, shaking their heads. And Louis had been away. And the first thing when he got back, one of these neighbors was in there to see him and said that we had taken leave of our senses. Louis came down and we told him what was happening, and he laughed.
See, he does mention a few stories like that in his books about how you were plowing at one point the garden and doing a very bad job of it, considered by your neighbors to be a very bad job of it. And
well, when you use something like one of these tillers, see that? That's the way your field was.
Very rough ground.
You just tore it up. And then you would come along with a disc later and chop it up some more, but it was rough. And you wanted to leave it that way. You wanted to leave the trash on top. And then we would come in with a grain drill and plant grain in there after fitting this in. And the neighbors just couldn't see that. It was terrible farming. It actually looked terrible. Well, you can see the field is.
So you mentioned you lived in that house. You said your family started restoring it or fixing it up.
Yeah.
And did they continue to live in the house or until he
lived in the house? I think 2 years. During that time, we installed a bathroom. We installed water in the bathroom, and we didn't solve the heating problem. They did that later. But and then we got a chance to move into the little house there at the central set of buildings. Here's the big house. Here's the lower place where the machinery sheds are. Mm-hmm. That little white house that was there by the machine sheds.
Okay.
That's where we moved next.
Okay.
And it was there I was when I first went to college. And I was studying agriculture at Ohio State. The first thing we had happen at Ohio State was the freshman mixer. That's where I met her.
Your wife. Well, I've got a lot of questions here. If possible, could you kind of describe when you first came to the farm, when you moved into that house, what was the typical day like? You'd mentioned a little bit about what your dad started doing at the farm there, but what was you specifically? What would you get up in the morning and do in terms of routine? I assume chores?
Yes. When we first went there, we were establishing the shop. That shop area and so forth that's there around the little house, even though we were living down at the other place.
So those buildings are original too?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we were setting that up and equipping it. First we equipped it with our own tools. And gradually the farm acquired tools and so forth. But we also we moved there in the fall. So we went through the first winter without ever going into the fields. We were working entirely in the buildings and so forth. After they after a year or two of that,
changed my mind.
anyhow, I went back to, when I went back to college and met her, we continued our schooling for 2 years. And then we quit. We were married in 1948. And we went back to the farm. And they had a Quonset hut, if you remember, an arch-ribbed building on the farm. And they converted that to a house for Gwen and I.
Where was that located?
It was, I don't know whether, there may be a picture in here. I'll talk on it. That's Texas.
Near the big house, or was it?
It was a central set of buildings. And we, you know where the machine shop is.
Mm-hmm.
You go down that buildings that are built in an L that goes toward the barn, what's sitting over here. If you passed around the corner of that L, the Quonset was right there. And it was right beside the road where they take the wagons out with people on them to tour the farm. They were doing that even then.
So, back to a typical day. You would get up, you would do chores around the farm?
Mostly we were setting up that area and getting the machinery, and that's when we got our Ferguson tractors. So we had to get those set up. We actually assembled them.
Really?
And used, and we got the equipment for them. And we actually started to learn to use that equipment because it was different from ours.
Here's a question for you. Ford had developed his 9N tractor in '39.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't Malabar or Lee Bromfield use those tractors instead of Ferguson? Was it just because he had developed a deal with them?
Ferguson developed a 3-point system. The implement was attached to 2 arms that came out here that swung up and down, and a third arm up here on the pylon. There. That allowed the tiller to rise out of the ground almost vertically and back down in. This was an integral system. The hydraulic pump was in the, and it allowed that tiller to go along and always stay at 8 inches deep or 4 inches deep, whatever we set it at. And it was a system that was completely foreign in this country that Harry Ferguson had developed. He used Cork, Ireland.
So he actually shipped them over to...
Yeah, my dad went to Cork, Ireland, to the factory, and they trained him on these particular tractors and implements, so that when we got them, we could just put them together.
And then they sent the implements along with it then?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Certain basic ones. Others we immediately, Ford started to try to ape this. They had to get around that hydraulic pump. Ferguson had it all tied up in patents. And so finally what they did was buy Ferguson out. And so it became the Ford Ferguson. And because Ford had a plant in Ireland that manufactured Ford tractors. In fact, we had at one time a Fordson tractor, that's the early tractor, that was built in Cork, Ireland.
Did it have a 3-point on it? Or
no?
Okay. And was that Fordson, were you using that on the farm there?
No, this was our time, it would have been many years before we went to the farm. It was in our early days of moving around.
Okay. Yeah. And then, what sort of things would you do in the evenings and your days off there? Or did you get days off? Did they give you, say, like weekends off? Or
not the farm, and both Dad and I had dairy experience, so we had to spell off the dairyman so he could get a day off once in a while. And of course, sometimes he had to help out so we could get a day off. And so it was at first not easy because we were trying to get all the fields into cultivation and get the sugar camp back in operation and get the pastures ready for beef cattle. And we had a herd of 30 Holstein cows, which we're constantly adding to, and they wanted to have a beef herd. In fact, they had a start of a beef herd, and we added greatly to that. We started crossbreeding the Holstein cows with Angus, and this made us a Angus-like animal that was still black, like the Angus, and but it built a little more length to it, a little more loin, if you will, and so it was a better more marketable thing than the Angus itself.
And were they being sold as beef cattle?
Mm-hmm.
So what sort of things would you do around the farm there? You talked a lot about swimming in the lake down there.
We used to swim in the lake occasionally, and once in a while. We built ponds in each of the. He had one pond built originally when he built the big house, and it was up there, and then and it was cold as sin. It was spring fed, and it was nice to swim in, but you sure wanted to.
Sure,
you first went in there, it was excruciating. But we built additional ones at each set of buildings for fire protection, primarily, and then we stocked fish, sunfish, and smallmouth bass, and we also swam in them. As we would go by with a hay wagon to unload it in the barn, we just wore shorts and little Abner shoes. We'd strip off our shoes and go splashing while they drove the hay wagon, got it positioned in the barn, and then we'd go help unload the hay and then back to the fields.
He talks a lot about in his books of entertaining there at Malabar, and it seemed like there was always someone there, always visitors coming far away or just down the road.
It was, I can remember Lawrence Tibbet was there. He singed his eyebrows burning the brush, helping us burn brush on the farm. Elliot Roosevelt, Faye Emerson came. I can remember my Dad and Elliot Roosevelt shaking their fingers at each other like this in an argument on the evening we spent with them up there. Whenever he'd have somebody like this on the farm, we'd have an evening when we'd all go up and attend, and then we would get a chance to meet these people and talk with them. And
this was at his house, at the big house.
Sometimes play poker or whatever, and we would talk. But anyhow, it was fun.
He talked some about barn dances. Was that something that he held quite a bit there?
What?
Barn dances?
Oh, yes. Those came later. We used to clear the big barn there by his house, and it had a new straw shed on the back of it that had a good solid floor, and we would have barn dances in there, bring in a fiddler and somebody to play the piano and so forth, and they just...
Were these mostly people that he knew?
Locals, yeah. This would be a weekend thing, sort of a thing, but yeah.
Okay. egotist, maybe a little domineering. Would you agree with that?
Not really. He was as common as an old shoe, really, once you got to know him. He could be domineering, but he had aplomb in almost any situation. I can recall once we would have groups come during the day, like ladies' clubs. They'd come in the bus and so forth, or farmers, a whole bunch of farmers come around. We would load them up on hay wagons and take them around the farm. Most of the time, he did the talking. He would tell them about what we were doing, and they would go up on Mount Gees, which was the highest point there, right thereabouts, and you could point out everything on the farm. And you've probably been up on Mount Gees.
So he was a pretty nice guy to work for.
Yeah.
Did you know Bromfield's wife and children?
Mm-hmm.
You're about his daughter's ages, weren't you? Or were they young?
Yeah, Ellen's the middle daughter. Well, Ellen was the youngest daughter, but Hope was a little older than I. And Ellen was a little younger. And I suppose Hope was really the closest to my age, but she was a little harder to get to know. Not to her discredit, it was just that she had enough boarding school experience that she was a little different.
A lot of people talked about Bromfield's wife having a hard time dealing with the farm and his devotion to it. Would you say that's accurate?
To a degree, Mary was not a farmer. She definitely wasn't a farmer. You got to understand that she never came out on the farm. And in fact, she seldom came out of the house. And when she did come out of the house, it was to go somewhere, either to town or to travel somewhere or something like that.
Did she come out for the entertaining?
No, not really. The girls entered into the barn dances, but I think they kind of got started at their behest. I think Ellen. We had about 6 boys would be recruited from Cleveland every year and brought down to the farm for farm hands to learn about farming. These were kids that were raised in rich families. They hadn't had any experience like this. It was completely foreign to them. And this was before I got married. And it was, the Quonset hut was put up as a dormitory for them. And it was just open, closed at both ends with beds in it and lockers. And so I would ride herd on those boys as their sort of their, how shall I say, proctor or something to see that they behave themselves. We got them an old Model A Ford touring car. And Dad and I put that in shape for them to operate. So some of them learned to drive. They were on the farm.
By what age were these kids? Varying ages? Or?
They would be high school age. And some of them were football players. Well, a lot of them were, strong and so forth. But by the time they left, they, for the most part, really liked the farm. In fact, Ellen finally married one of those boys, and that was Carson Geld. And they started Malabar de Brazil. And that's a whole other story. She's written several books.
Now, were they the couple that eventually came back to Pleasant Valley,
farmer to try to produce the same sort of thing that Louis was doing. And so that lasted for are they still there when you?
Yeah.
But so they must have stayed 5 or 7 years, something like that, and finally went back east. There was another daughter, Anne, who was the oldest, and she went west finally, and she never did get married. She wrote, but she was kind of strange. During the time we were there, Humphrey Bogart and Laura McCall were married there on the farm.
Did you get to meet them?
I did. Laura McCall is exactly the same age as I am. I was 18 at the time.
Was there a rather large reception afterwards?
Not really. It was a rather quiet one. They're at the big house, but there was a reception, as I recall. I know that Lauren's mother was there. Bogey was older, and I don't think he had any family. And he was a nice guy, incidentally.
Many have criticized Bromfield's ideas at Malabar in terms of his goals that he basically came up with were not suited for the common farmer because he executed this with large sums of money that he had received from his publishing. Would you agree that this is true?
The farm was built and equipped by movies. Okay, and as it was purchased, built, and equipped by movies. And at the time that he got Malabar and started it, he had the Green Bay Tree, The Rains Came, and Mrs. Parkington all being made into movies at the same time. So it was, it was really...
Did you ever feel that the average farmer could use the techniques that he was applying there and still make a living?
Absolutely. That was the thing, especially the local farmers. There were only 1 or 2 that adopted what we were doing and discovered that it was actually a better way to do it. Farmers don't change easy.
Stubborn bunch. So, do you think that was one of his major goals, was to produce new techniques on his farm that could be applied to other farms?
Yeah, the contouring of the fields and the use of trash-type farming all were aimed at stopping erosion. We were losing, and we're still losing, acres and acres of farms every year going down the rivers. And we can see it even out in Washington. Out in front of our house is the bay, and we live right at the delta that's forming from where the Nooksack River comes into the bay. And when the low tide comes, we can see that delta building out across there. And it's, several more farms came down this year. And there's no reason for that. No reason at all. They can prevent that.
So in your opinion, we haven't learned much since his time? Actually, I have a question that's related to that. Let me see if I can find it here. Brownfield makes a lot of, in his books, of restoring the fields and the cropland to productiveness. Did you feel that by the time you had left, you saw a very noticeable difference in the soil conditions and the productiveness of those fields?
Absolutely. That first house we lived in, the fields there I told you about, we drove in with the combine to combine the oats and turned around and left the field without doing anything, and then plowed it under. Okay. That field went from no yield up to a 40 bushels an acre yield by the time I left the farm. So I know it can be done, and I know how to do it.
And what would be your method?
Well, you have to resort to things like trash farming and contour farming, especially in that foothill area, or that rugged area there. The other thing is you've got to start plowing down crops. Louis liked the ladino clover. That's fine, but and there was a twofold reason for that. It provided heavy growth to be plowed under, and it also provided a lot of nitrogen, which would give you results quickly.
Now, you're not talking plow in terms of the moldboard plow. You're talking this like the semen tiller.
I know they have the moldboard plows, plowing matches there at the farm. Yeah, but that's a antiquated instrument. Let it die.
Yeah. Well, I guess that brings us to a little bit about the equipment there. We talked some about the Ferguson tractors. There's also many pictures of John Deere tractors that you use.
Yeah, when we first went there, they had John Deere tractors, and they had three, as I recall. And one was a big one, and the other two were smaller. And these were two-cylinder tractors. There's a big flywheel on the side. You started by cranking that flywheel. And we got these four Fergusons, and subsequently added another one. And we let one of the John Deeres go, kept one of the small ones for a while yet. We kept the big one because we didn't have anything in the Ferguson line that was that big that could prime mover. And so we drove practically everything with the Ferguson tractor.
So, did he ever buy much farm equipment, or was there a lot of experimental farm equipment being produced that was brought to him to try out?
I suppose there was a lot of, yes, because of his interest in experimental farming, we got a chance to try out a lot of interesting things. A lot of planters and other things that could operate in trash, which is a big problem. That's one reason farmers don't like it. The average.
So, he preferred the Graham Howe plow.
Yeah. In fact, Dad and I took on an agency for it. We sold them all over Ohio for a while.
Is this at the time you were working there, or after?
It was during the time we were working there. And that, he encouraged it, because nobody would take them and sell them. So we did it right there.
And then the semen tiller that came along?
Yeah, that's a mixed blessing. We used it. It was a monster, with a big Chrysler industrial engine that operated this thing. And to tell you the truth, how it was developed, when the military was in the islands during the Second World War, they needed to build airstrips. They took an ordinary tiller and welded all the tines clutches so that they couldn't slip, and used it to break up the coral down to about that depth. And they would add cement to that broken up coral and roll it down and make a runway. And, we went back to the sieve and tiller, basically, that was used for that, and put the clutches back in operation. Only changed the type of clutch so that it wouldn't slip so easily, and that's what we tried out. It worked. Now, you had to, if you did that, you had to be careful. It could churn things down to fine sand, which is not the way you want to do it. And so we had to be satisfied with the rough, go over the soil once, maybe twice, cross-till it, and then settle for that, because otherwise you chopped up all the trash to the point where it burned off before it actually got incorporated in the soil.
There's some pictures in one of his books. He used it for chopping up corn stalks. Is that right?
Yeah,
corn stubble.
Yeah. In fact, as a matter of fact, I think I was operating it. I had a picture. There's a clown. That's me. I know it's right here.
Yeah, I think it is there in the back.
Oh well, no matter.
And Willie's Jeep. He bought a Jeep, right?
The first Jeep was given to us. It was a military surplus Jeep, and it worked fine. And
did he use it for farming?
No.
Just to get around.
We did use that first one, try it out for farming. You got to understand, during the war, you couldn't get help. You could barely get fuel. It was hard to get tires. And so we operated with a skeleton crew. And we developed a system of planting corn, for instance, that we started around the field and went on in a spiral. Never stopped. You pulled the corn planter with either a Jeep or a modified car that was modified into what we called a whoopie. And they would be going at about 20 miles an hour. And you'd have a man posted over at the corner, and every time he'd come by, he would dump a load in one of the bins on the planter. The next time he'd dump a load in the other bin, and away. Just kept right on going continuously. Those tractors operated night and day. We had just the 3 tractors. This is before the Ford Fergusons, and we had 3 tractors, and they were going constantly. Somebody would come out and take over from you, and that went on into the night.
During planting and harvest.
Yeah. And haymaking and so forth, because we just didn't have the manpower to handle it. Otherwise, we just worked around the clock.
And did they come with lights, or did you have to put the lights on?
We put the lights on. And
did Ferguson ever visit the farm?
Yeah. Yeah, I met him, and he was quite a guy, little guy. He was maybe 5'1", something like that, and very animated, and
point. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what happened?
Oh, I realized I'd never make enough money to buy a farm.
Not working for him.
Not working for anybody. For somebody to go into farming, to buy a farm, they'll have to go heavily into debt. There's no way about it. Unless you're rich, in which case, what do you want a farm for? And so I don't understand how they must. Most of the farms are owned either by big combines and operated as corporate farms, or they're very large. They're operated by families that have incorporated.
Were you around his boxers much?
Yeah.
You have any stories?
Well,
plenty of
boxers love to fight. If they can't find a strange animal to fight, they'll get in a fight among themselves. And so these have to be broken up, or they'll really, accidentally mangle each other. They don't really intend any damage, but the only way you can do it is wade in and grab collars and pull them out. And so you never, Louis was the first one I ever saw do it. He waded in there and throwing boxers in all directions. And we realized he never got by this, so pretty soon we realized we could safely do it too, and you just waded in, throw boxers in all directions until you got them broken up.
I like the story about I forget who it was that came to visit him, but when they came out, the boxers had figured out how to get into his car and were sitting on the front seat there waiting for him when they came out.
Well, people would come in and they'd do the strangest things, leave their car open. We had a Tom Turkey that thought he was a dog. And when you drove in, he would chase the car and he would peck the tires until it stopped. Then he'd leave it alone.
Well, I'd like to wrap up here. I just got a couple more questions. Have you ever read Edward Faulkner's Primal's Folly? Did you ever meet him?
No, I never met him.
Do you know if he ever came to the farm?
I don't recall that he ever did. Now, he may have before we got to the farm, because I know Louis knew him, and but Faulkner died somewhere in there. So, we couldn't have met him.
It seemed like through the writings of Bromfield that he really respected him and used a lot of his ideas. Would you say that's true?
Yeah. 5 acres and independence. Was Faulkner's theme.
Did you feel that while you were there you were part of something special, or was it really a job?
It was special. It really was. We got a chance to live a life that you couldn't live anyplace else. It was a community life, and we were a closed community. It wasn't us against them, but it was, we could have built a wall around it and charged admission, I suppose.
And many have said that when Bromfield died, he was somewhat of a defeated person, maybe somewhat depressed. Do you think this is true? Would you agree with that?
I wasn't there, so I don't know, but I would say it was not possible to defeat him. Okay, he was indomitable in his beliefs, and I think that if he was depressed at the final moments, it was probably because of his health as much as anything. Mary had died. There wasn't anything left. All of us had left the farm. We do move on. And I think, in a way, this disappointed him. I'm sorry to say, but Gwen's not a farmer. And a farm, and she lived in a Wisconsin hut for 5 years, and every time the buses would go by, the dust clouds would roll into the house. And so when we got a chance to leave, we left.
Do we have time for 2 more? Just quick ones?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Was there anything that you took away from your experience at Malabar that has really stuck with you through the rest of your life?
Yeah, I found out there that I could do just about anything I wanted if I wanted to pursue it. And when I left, it was because of health reasons. I had developed pains in my lower back. And that's one reason I was never in the military, is when I went for the draft, they rejected me because they said you can never carry a 90-pound pack. I was throwing 90-pound bales up on hay wagons, but that didn't matter.
So you think that mentality came through your discussion with Louis, or what he inspired in you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that. We had a camaraderie there that was electric. It was almost a fraternity, if you will. A band of brothers, kind of thing.
And lastly, have you been back to Malabar since it
Many
became a
times.
state park? Yeah. What are your impressions of what it's become?
Well, I like some things that they've done, and others, it's too bad. The big barn burned down, of course, and they rebuilt it, but it's not the same. I can understand, that's it. That's the way it is. The Friends of the Land, he willed the farm to the Friends of the Land, and they couldn't handle it. They couldn't bankroll it. That was not their cup of tea. And so finally we got them to deed it over to the state of Ohio, which they did. Ohio operates an agricultural school which operates experimental farms. The idea was that it might become an experimental farm. The state of Ohio saw fit to make it into a park. And maybe that's better, because they still do things somewhat in the way that we did them. And as a demonstration. And so, yeah, I think that's all right.
But in many ways, it hasn't changed much
That's
since
right.
you were there, right? You still do a lot of touring today as they did at your time.
Yeah, I could give you a tour of the big house. In fact, we went on a tour through the big house while we were there. The tales they're telling have no connection with reality.
Well, I think we'll end there. I really appreciate your time.